Hello, I will be introducing the sensory modality story. Vision. The stimulus for vision is a small segment of the electromagnetic spectrum that we know as visible light, which ranges from 400 to 700 nanometers through the cornea, then the iris, then through the pupil. Once through the pupil, the light goes through the lens, which focuses the image light, then reflects to the back of the eye and is transduced by the rod receptors and cone receptors of the retina. Once the photoreceptors are activated, neuron message travels through the rods and cones, horizontal cells, the bipolar cells, amacrine cells, and the ganglion cells of the axons of the ganglion cells. The axons of the ganglion cells exit the eyeball and form the optic nerve. The optic nerve decussates through the brain to the optic tract. After crossing over the top of the optic nerve, it becomes the optic tract, both containing information from both eyes. The optic tract synapse at the LGN, which is the lateral geniculate nucleus, which is the first synapse and projects via the optic radiation onto the dorsal, which projects the perception of location and motion, and ventral pathway, which projects the perception of color and form, then leads to the primary visual cortex and the occipital lobe. Now I will be discussing audition. Audition is vibrating air molecules that enter the pinna at 15 to 20,000 hertz. It travels down the ear canal, which then the air hits the tympanic membrane, which causes it to vibrate the same way the air did when it entered. Then the ossicles vibrate, starting with the malleus, then incus, and finally stapes. The stapes causes the oval window to vibrate, and the vibrating of the oval window causes the fluid within the cochlea to vibrate. The hair cells of the basilar membrane and the tectorial membrane receive the vibration, which turns to increase firing of the axons on the auditory nerve, also known as the cranial nerve 8. In the hindbrain, the auditory nerve carries the neurotransmitter to the cochlear nuclei, and from there it goes to the medial and lateral superior olivary nuclei. Then the axon travels to the inferior cochleus into the midbrain. From there, it travels to the MGN, which is the medial geniculate nucleus, in the thalamus, in the forebrain, and projects to the primary auditory cortex, which is located in the temporal lobe. Gustation. Gustation is stimulated by sucrose, HCl, quinine, NaCl, and MSG. And for a person who would not know this terminology, it will be better known as bitter, sour, salty, and sweet. These taste receptors are found on the tongue. Within the papilla, there are taste buds, and within the taste buds are the taste receptors, which distinguish the different tastes. Gustatory neurons leave the mouth as part of the facial or cranial nerves 7, 9, and 10. These fibers all terminate in the solitary nucleus of the medulla, where they synapse on the VPN of the thalamus. They then project on the primary gustatory cortex. Olfaction. Okay, olfaction is stimulated through the chemicals in the air that travel up the nose and in through the sinus cavities to the olfactory receptor cells in the cilia. The receptor cells, axon, enter the olfactory bulb where the synapse to the mitral cells or cranial nerve 2, and then the mitral cells synapse on the olfactory cortex.
Is that it?
This is an image of the brain that shows a closer view from the outside looking in of the olfactory cortex, of the olfactory bulb and the receptors. Following: touch. Stimulation of a touch receptor opens sodium channels in the axon and starts an action potential. Touch receptors enter the spinal cord via the dermatomes, dorsal roots, then ascend in the dorsal part of the spinal cord to the dorsal column nuclei. Axons from dorsal column nuclei decussate in the medulla, then ascend towards the thalamus via dorsal column medial lamicus. Then a synapse occurs in the ventral posterior nucleus of the thalamus. Axons from the VPN project to the primary somatosensory cortex that is located on the parietal lobe. Pain. Alright, now, pain information crosses to the contralateral side of the spinal cord at once. The pathways then continue to the brain via the spinal thalamic tract. This axonal pathway begins in the spine, then ends in the thalamus. The spinal thalamic tract conveys pain and temperature and crude touch. Primary sensory nerves that register pain have cell bodies that lie in the posterior dorsal root ganglion. The synapse in the posterior horn of the dorsal root in the spinal cord. The secondary neurons cross the spinal cord and contralateral and ascend to the brain via the lateral spinal thalamic tract in a spinotopic arrangement. Secondary neurons synapse in the VPN of the thalamus. From the VPN of the thalamus, tertiary neurons ascend via the internal capsule to the primary sensory cortex. These cells also branch off axons collaterals to the limbic system, hypothalamus, and other portions of the CNS, such as the oblongata, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex. These areas react not to the sensation of pain, but to its emotional associations. Descending analgesic circuit. The inhibition of pain information in the brain is due to the activation of natural opioids, or endorphins in the midbrain structure. The PAG, better known as the periaqueductal gray, which surrounds the cerebral aqueduct in the midbrain. Axons from the PAG synapse back to the spinal cord and decreases pain signals in the spinal cord. Therefore, even though pain receptors may be firing the signal to the brain, has been blocked, and therefore the injured individual does not experience pain. Certain kinds of painful and other stimuli send emotional pain information from the cortex to the PAG via endorphin neurotransmitters. The PAG projects to the area in the rostral part of the medulla and excites cells that release more endorphin neurotransmitter into the spinal cord. The endorphin neurotransmitter inhibits the primary sensory nerve, which is releasing substance P as a neurotransmitter, and therefore stops areas of the spinal cord that receive pain messages from sending ascending pain messages to the brain. The injured person experiences no pain because of this process. And that will be the end of my sensory modality story. Thank you.